What's up, guys? Steven here today. And today, what I wanted to talk to you about is the concept of physiotypes. And it's kind of funny because this is actually a video that I promised to y'all like a long time ago. And it was initially gonna be a fucking audio podcast. But here I am saying, fuck it, let's just video it up because I feel like maybe it'll provide more value. So, as I always do with all things, for the sake of fruitful conversation and the building upon of the base case upon which our logical the logical framework of our foundation is built, I'll go ahead and define a physiotype as simply as the ratio upon which you currently, that is in this present time and space, are outputting energy to the ratio upon which you're receiving energy or having energy being inputted to you, right? So this is a drastic generalization, but for the sake of scope creep, I'll just keep it to that, right? So it's the ratio at which mind and body are overall outputting energy to the ratio upon which mind and body overall are having energy being inputted within them, right? So what does this mean? Essentially, it's as if there is a tandem, right? It's almost like this way where the more you're outputting energy is essentially causing, if you will, for lack of better words, a rise in your body, a rise in temperature, a rise in energy. What this means is, plain simple, it's as if you have a motor and it's heating up, right? The more you use your motor, the more it produces heat, right? And then, as with everything, there is essentially an inherent, what I call threshold limit, a threshold capacity where once you hit that point, the motor can no longer sustain so much heat. And so what happens is it has to go down in its output energy, and it has to essentially receive energy back into it. So water, right? It has to be cooled down, prevent overheating, right? Once it cools down now below that threshold limit, it'll essentially be able to resume fruitful output of energy once again. And the key term there is fruitful. What I'm saying is every output of energy is not always fruitful. You can be putting out shit, but then it's not doing anything. It's actually causing your own detriment, right? Just as you can literally be doing little to nothing, and that carries so much more, right? Now, to relate this back to physiology and physiotypes, this is what we are talking about. And it's kind of funny because I had another way of going about it, but I'm so glad that it's coming out in this bottoms up way. And the key to all this essentially is water. How much water what is a percentage that water is occupying your body, but more specifically in your intestines? Because everything stems from that. If your intestines are full of water, what's going to happen is that point where you're reaching threshold capacity will never occur because there'll be such a surplus of energy to draw upon to keep it balanced, to keep it cool, to keep it within operating range. When you're lacking water, what happens is it dries up. And so now you're essentially running on fumes. You're causing catabolysis to occur. Basically, your body is cannibalizing upon itself. Why I'm bringing all this is because it ties into, you've heard of metabolic body types, right? Mesomorph, antromorph, blah, blah, blah. And for one reason or the other, I've always felt like that could be simplified even more because it caused this thing where people thought that they were one thing and one thing only for the rest of their lives, and there was nothing they could change about it. And what I'm trying to introduce to this video is nothing is set in stone, not even that. In fact, it literally works like a wheel. So if you, whether or not you've been paying attention, I recently introduced this element of plasma, right? Trying with the hopes in mind to essentially bring about conversation has to raising awareness to the fact that we're mislabeling the phenomenons that we attribute to the label called ether and plasma, and this is something that we have to essentially reconcile in order to move forward on much dramatic, deeper things. And I hope with the passing of time that I'm able to put the pieces together that will allow the opportunity for me to talk in great length about that. But to not digress much further, I introduced this element of plasma, right? It was in my recent notes. And I mentioned how essentially the earth was built, it started with plasma, and then it phased into the state of matter we call as water. Then it became fire, then it became earth, right? And then it became air, right? And so I believe that that wheel is essentially occurring on all micro and micro levels, just constantly repeating itself. At times, based on different factors, one phase might last, or one stage of matter might be more predominant than the other. Or even at times there might be something to the sort of like a combination or a symbiosis where it's actually two or more elements are present in a stage that is not typically found, or in a moment where that is not typical, where that should not be the case, right? In a moment where maybe one element should be more dominant than the others. And so this creates for what we call interesting climates. But now to bring it back to the body and physiotypes, I actually believe that we are at our most primal and truest beings made of plasma. If you want to call it, that is our natural, or the natural frequency that I alluded to a while ago, right? So the goal is to resonate at the frequency of plasma, because that is the frequency of creation. That is the frequency where all possible things become possible, right? And so now what happens is, based on where you currently are in your body, you're essentially undergoing a journey towards it, meaning sometimes you might be having to move back because it's just much faster for you, or you might actually have to go through the entire cycle itself, right? Someone that's extremely heavy in density will have to lose that density, while someone who is extremely pressure driven may have to decrease that pressure or increase it depending on where they are. And so this essentially creates this, if you want, fluid membrane where you're undergoing different notable characteristics, right? And so this is where I bring up something really funny, because one of my main beliefs is that God, if you, or higher intelligence, whatever you call it, teaches us through all things, most notably in the things that we are most least likely to hear from, right? So if you can be a learner from all things, you will always have an edge and an advantage over the people who only subscribe to listening to the things that they favor. This is how you gain a multi-dimensional perspective. But something that came to mind was the concept of emojis, and particularly the sexual ones, right? So you typically run across the peach, mentioning a big booty, right? You come across the cucumber, right? Mentioning a huge fucking dick. And then I threw in the hourglass, which is essentially your penultimate body shape that every girl, or even guy, if you think about just what a V cut is striving to achieve. Now, then I talk about, I believe that these are actually the different physiotypes that we find ourselves, right? And we're all essentially trying to move towards the hourglass, because the hourglass is like the doorway to that plasmic frequency. Why? Because it's the hourglass. It's the physiotype where it's easy to gain and it's also easy to lose weight. If you think about what flow is, right? The state at which you're able to move through things with little to no resistance, then it only makes sense that if I eat too much, then I feel the repercussions of that. And so once I either rise the fire within my oven, kind of like from the Oven Concept podcast, and metabolize all that food, then by virtue of being, by virtue of nature, I should feel the lessening effects of reducing that load. And so that means easy gain, easy loss, or easy input, or a sensitive input mechanism and a sensitive output mechanism, right? Because you feel the energy that's inputted within you on all levels and deeply, and then at the same time, you're able to output all of that energy deeply and fully, just in the same way as you received it, right? So that's one physiotype, the hourglass. The next physiotype, as I mentioned, the peach, is essentially the one where everything, it's easy to gain, right? Meaning it's hard to gain weight because for one reason or the other, your input mechanism is not as sensitive. Energy that should be gathered within you with little to no effort is encountering some form of resistance, some form of friction. Maybe there's a problem with your esophagus. Maybe you have a skeleton misalignment causing you to feel all these different congestion issues, right? All these things. And so what that means now is, conversely, on the opposite end, it's also hard for you to lose weight or energy, or it's hard for you to output energy, because not only you feel the bottleneck when you're trying to receive the energy, but then now there's nothing for you to run on. So now you have a hard time gaining. And another simple way of putting it is, well, look at the peach, right? It has like a nice curved top, right? Imagine if the top was like a funnel, right? It's like nice and curved, right? This is the mouth, right? So it has a small top, and then it has this huge bottom line, meaning that whatever goes in will stay in there, because on the opposite end of it, there's nothing that's really pulling it out. It's rounded. It's not curved like the funnel, right? So it's hard to gain, hard to lose. The next one is the cucumber. And the cucumber, the way I put it is, it's almost like you're just driving down the fucking highway, right? And it's just like a straight fucking line. And the thing is, whatever is in front of you dictates what's going to happen to you. What that means is that if the thing that's moving in front of you is moving at a rapid pace, then you will be moving at a rapid pace. But if the thing in front of you is moving at a slow pace, you will be moving at a slow pace, right? So in other words, it's almost in the same way, just like the peach, right? Meaning that there is also that funnel, whatever, it's clipped at the top as well, right? But the saving grace is, unlike the peach, it has a bottom, right? So I call it easy gainer, in the sense that like whatever is in front of you is dictating what's happening to you. Meaning that, okay, just because you might have like a small entrance, at least you're able to get something in with relative to some difficulty. And I say that it's an easy loser because on some level, you're able to actually push it out, right? So, wait, hold on one sec. Let me make, because I literally wrote notes on this, so I want to make sure that I'm saying this right. So the cucumber is actually a hard gainer and easy loser because what's coming in has some resistance to come in, but at least you have the benefit of being able to output it because you have another entrance at the bottom. So if another way of, I guess, reading this whole schema is you have an entrance, you have a midway point, which you might want to call the conversion point, and then you have an exit, right? So those 3 points literally dictate the physiotype you're essentially operating at. If you have the way, it's kind of funny, but I was using words like tunnel and top funnel and bottom line, right? So the peach tends to have a small top funnel, but it has a huge bottom line. The hourglass has a huge top funnel and a huge bottom line. And the cucumber has a small top funnel and a huge conversion process, but a small bottom line. And if you want to think of it, if you want another way of thinking of the conversion point, it's essentially the point when energy is converted from potential energy to kinetic energy, right? So when you're receiving something, it always comes in a package. For you to use it, you have to unravel the package, take out the straps, the strings, blah, blah, blah. Get to the matter of what it is you actually have in front of you. Only then can it be absorbed and then utilized, right? And that's what the conversion point does. And those 3 points define the physiotype you're at. And if you think about it, any bodybuilding journey, you're essentially going through a phase of these 3 points not working well, or one working better than the other, or one not working at all and the other working more than it should, to them working at least in alignment, right? And then to them working at optimum point, at optimum capacity, or at optimum pace, meaning they're so efficient it is as if there are one, right? And that's when you get to the hourglass, meaning when you're eating, you to a point of when you're eating, you've received as much energy as you need. Your input system is sensitive enough to tell you you are satiated, and so you don't eat anymore, right? And then what do you do on top of that? Because you have habits that keep you going, like drinking water. You drink water, and then 30 to an hour later, you're like, the thought arises that maybe you should burn off those calories, and you go work out. And the workout that you do produces the exact results necessary to not only use that energy, but to convert into muscle, convert it into mass, more importantly, convert it to matter that is beneficial and conducive for your well-being. And that's how you evolve, right? So it's this continuum, and the holy grail, if you will, is the hourglass, because once it's full, it flips, right? Okay, I have spent myself at the gym. I no longer have energy. Time to go home and replenish. And so the hourglass flips back to, let's input now, right? And it's this continuous wheel. And it's such a beautiful process if you think about it that way. Now, the main important point that I wanted to kind of say is that a lot of times people think that this is something that they're stuck with, right? Like they believe that, oh, I'm this sort of physiotype and I'll never change, when really it's not. So what I wanted to give to you is one simple hack, or one way of assessing kind of where you are. So I put it, the cucumber tends to be protein dominant, right? Meaning that if you think about any person that essentially gains hard and loses easy, it tends to be because for one reason or the other, there is a point, as I mentioned, at the conversion process that needs help, right? It's not coincidence why a diet that's full of protein shakes tends to give you the shitters that are painful, right? It's not a coincidence, because not only do you have an overabundance of amino acids, but the thing that people often forget is that in order to convert energy, you need a glucoprotein. You need this complementing element that essentially breaks down the amino acids and creates or gets the body going towards the Krebs cycle, right? The process that converts or creates energy. And for that, you actually need fat. You need lipids because they are there for that. So if you tend to eat more protein than anything else, you most likely have this physiotype. And one way to essentially help yourself move towards a better one is by eating that which you're lacking of, right? So in this case, probably just ease up on the protein and get in more fats. As simple as that. The next fucking physiotype is the hourglass. And funny enough, it's the one that people wouldn't realize, but to get an hourglass physiotype, you actually need to be lipid dominant. And I use lipids and not triglycerides for a particular reason. Because a lot of time people focus on hemoglobins, right? They focus on the things in the blood. But I believe that if you don't have a good channel, then like whatever it is, you can introduce as many foreign elements that are there to stir up or cause a stimulus as you want, but it will never work because it's not native to the body itself, right? Fats are necessary because they enhance the production of this one critical vitamin or one critical mineral that we often forget that literally runs the show. It's called vitamin D, right? And essentially we use that element, or this mineral is synthesized from sunlight, right? But what does the body do when you're not getting a lot of sunlight? Well, take pieces of other things that could essentially create some sort of process similar to the one that is in play when you're creating and synthesizing vitamin D, and it will essentially come up with, if you want to call it a knockoff brand that stands, right? It's not the purest shit, but it's good enough. So this is why that whole eat your carrots, eat your salad, all that shit is so fucking game changing because it goes a long way. You need minerals in your body, or else a lot of things that should be running well will not. And so that's why I actually believe the ones that eat a lot of lipids, like have a lipid dominant diet, are the ones with the hourglass physiotype. I mean, it's not for naught that like a true vegan, if you think about what it is in its essence, nature food, always has an edge over people who are eating processed, right? So that's kind of how I just put it. And then the final physiotype is the peach, and that's clearly the one that's carb dominant. And obviously it makes sense, right? It's all about just because this is the one that's dominant in sugars. And as much as sugars are good, you have to remember that anything that causes an excess of energy to be created essentially is creating waste in some ways. Like, no, it's good to essentially take respect and appreciate the fact that you store that which you do not use for later, but it's even better to envision ways in which that which is stored in the most efficient way possible, right? It's kind of like thinking about ways to store your butter in a way that you don't have to create all this extra shit that not only fucks up the butter, but then also causes it to go bad as it's being stored, if you will. Or switch the word butter for bacon. So that's essentially it. Now, as I mentioned, the key to all of this is understanding just how important water is. Your water intake. Because the more water you have, the more, essentially, it's almost like the body essentially just flows through these different physiotypes effortlessly and able to pull resources and even do things that should be nearly impossible based on what you currently have, simply because water has components within it that is able to gather different things that are not typically gatherable, but because water is the universal solvent, it can be. So drink your fucking water. It really helps, and you'll thank yourself a lot for it. I always advise people, I suggest, is that old fucking school way. Just take a gallon of milk and just fill it with water. You will pee a fuck ton. You will pee like every so often, but the sign that you're peeing often is actually a good thing, because if you've understood the message of this, it's all about circulation. And the more circulation you have, the richer the oxygen that is present is, which means that the blood is pure, purified even, if you want to get all meta. Anyways, these are some really heady content. I feel like I stumbled all over my fucking words. And if I did, I apologize for that. Hope you guys got something out of it. And as always, swag the fuck out.